An 8K 360 action camera. Here's everything you need to know about the Insta360 X4. So the X4 is a 360 action camera, which means it's going to cover a wide range of sort of footage. So it not only covers what's in front of the lens, but also what's around the lens, what's on top of the lens. It's, well, a 360 camera. So you can get some really cool shots that you wouldn't be able to otherwise get out of your standard camera or even your standard phone. So it really is a great option for those of you that are looking to sort of give yourself a more interesting sort of look when it comes to your videography, photography, or your blogging. The X4 itself, I am impressed by the amount of features they've crammed into this little thing. It does burn hot as a result of it, but it is amazing the sort of footage you can get out of this camera, and well, it is very easy to travel around with. So in terms of the design of the X4, it is a very lightweight sort of camera, as you can see here. It's about the weight of my phone, so about roughly 200 grams, so it's not a very heavy camera, and of course it can fit into your pocket. Look, it can even fit into the palm of my hand. It's a very portable sort of camera to work with, and it's going to be great for those of you who want to travel around or just don't want to carry a whole lot of equipment, especially if you're doing your own vlogging. Now, in terms of the layout on this camera itself, you do have the on button here, and right underneath the on button, you have a custom function button. Now, this is default set to sort of custom presets. So if you do want to sort of switch to a specific preset, you press this Q button here, and then you have your pick of the bunch. Of course, you can go into the settings of this camera and change your custom button to, well, whatever you need it to be. On the front here, you do have a shutter button, which requires a hard press, which is good. Don't want to accidentally sort of start recording all of a sudden, so I appreciate that. It also does have a USB-C port on the side here, which is great, much more of a universal port. And of course, it can be charged and transfer footage via this same USB-C port. So naturally, if you are using a lot of the high-end features on this camera is going to burn incredibly hot. Not like scalding hot, but very warm. It could probably act as a hand warmer in all honesty if you're shooting long enough with it. But what Insta360 has done is they have provided a thermal grip to the camera, so it's a lot less warmer when you're sort of holding it, particularly like this, and the thermal grip itself fits on nicely. Now, what you get in the box is fairly straightforward. You get the camera, the standard lens guards, the Type-C to C cable, the protective pouch, the thermal grip, the lens cloth, and the quick start guard. Now let's talk about the image quality of this camera, which is absolutely impressive for a camera that's this small. This camera can basically shoot 8K video at 30p, 5.7K at 60p, and 4K at 100p, with 5.7 plus at 30p, which is basically a sort of in between 5.7K and 8K. And it's still high quality footage, but it's not as high resolution or high memory as 8K. But do keep in mind that when you are shooting at high resolutions like 8K, and what I found myself is that this camera, well, it does begin to burn pretty hot once you shoot at 8K for long enough. So the camera does begin to heat up. So you do want to sort of be in a sort of colder environment or have the camera hit in wind constantly to sort of help cool it down, especially when it's around 8K. 5.7K and lower does right. 8K, you will begin to hit some overheating problems, although admittedly, I haven't really pushed the camera so much to the limit that shooting a few minutes of 8K has burned this camera out. It still works great, it's still amazing video quality, and that's not the only thing. The photo quality, of course, is also absolutely amazing, as you can basically get 72 megapixels out of this camera. Yep, 72 megapixels out of something this small. To give you a frame of reference, my phone captures 24 megapixels and the camera I'm shooting with right now captures 45 megapixels. So this is really crazy for such a small camera, as it does, again, give you plenty of options in post in terms of cropping to get that perfect image. In photo mode, if you don't want to have sort of very large photos, you can drop down the megapixels to 18 megapixels, although it is a bit of a shame that there's nothing between 72 megapixels and 18 megapixels. I would have liked maybe 30 or even just a standard 24 in between. And if you do need to shoot single frame content, you do have an option for single frame mode in this camera, which shoots 4K at 60p and 32 megapixels in photo. Now, in terms of exposure settings on the camera, it is fairly basic. You have an auto mode and a manual mode for the exposure settings, and that will give you a sort of decent sort of control of the exposure. And you do have control over the shutter speed and the ISO, but you do have no control over the aperture, as I guess, well, you are basically working with one lens here. Now, in terms of the shutter speed, it basically ranges from 1/100th to 1/8000th, and the ISO ranges from 100 to 1600. So that's a decent range. It's nothing crazy for like low light sort of conditions, but if you have a well exposed space and if you're shooting with this camera, I do recommend working in sort of well exposed spaces in order to make the most of it, it is a good range. Now, the two lenses on this camera are very wide at 170 degrees, so you are covering a very wide range and getting everything that you need in terms of that 360 video, as well as for your single frame shots where you want a very wide shot. Although, fun thing you might notice is that this means the camera isn't really ideal for sort of portraits or close-up shots, as it does have a tendency to sort of, distort and warp, which is something that naturally happens with very short or very wide lenses. But fortunately, you do have a feature in this camera, which is a de-warp feature, which will sort of crop the video in a bit, but remove some of that warping. But that being said, you still will get a bit of warping from this camera. So I do recommend using this camera for more wider shots and sort of more expansive shots, as opposed to sort of close-ups and those sort of smaller shots. Speaking of lenses, you do also have lens protection covers which come with the kit, and these basically ensure that the lenses on your camera are very much protected, as if you get a little scratch on that lens, it is going to show up on a lens that's that wide. So it's nice to have that little bit of extra protection coming straight out of the box. Although I will be honest, I'm not a fan of the lens covers in the box, as I do find that when I'm sort of applying them to the camera here, my fingerprints are basically getting all over the lens cover, which does honestly show up when you're sort of shooting with this camera. So I have to constantly get the little cloth that's inside the box, wipe the lens down, and basically make sure it's constantly clean. And these lens covers will fog up if there's a radical change in temperature. So if I drop this into water and then pull it out, the lens covers are going to fog up. So I'm honestly not a fan of these lens covers, especially when I found out, and you're probably want to buy these if you want to give your lens good protection. Insta360 also does have tempered glass lens covers for this very model here. Now what these basically are is just that, tempered glass. That ensures that there's zero sort of scratching. They're a lot more high quality sort of lens covers, and they'll give you a little bit of extra protection. And honestly, I would have liked to have had those in the box with this anyway. I don't really see much point in these little plastic ones, especially if they're gonna get scratched. They're gonna get scratched. If you're doing a lot of action photography or videography, maybe you drop them through some bushes or whatever, there's gonna be a high risk of these getting scratched. So you do wanna sort of invest in the tempered glass lens covers for the X4 as well. They're just better all around. Now the battery life on this camera is absolutely impressive, as it basically has upgraded the battery from the X3, meaning this battery lasts 67% longer and can shoot up to 135 minutes of video footage. That's fantastic for this, especially for such a small camera. And pretty much what you'll be happy to know is that you can charge this battery via USB. So if you get a portable battery, your laptop, or any sort of device that has a USB-C, basically you can charge this camera anytime, anywhere. And for a full charge, it takes little under an hour to fully charge this camera, so you're up and ready to go with it at a moment's notice. And while the battery here isn't a very universal sort of design, it's not like a AA or a generic sort of lithium-ion battery, I do like that I can remove it from the camera here, as it means I can buy multiple of these, have them fully charged, and when one runs out, I can just sort of swap them around. So that's a blessing in itself. And if you are worried about this camera randomly being left on and draining battery power, you'll be happy to know that this camera does automatically turn off after a certain period of time, which you can control in the settings. Now let's talk about the stabilization in this camera, of which there's 3 types I'd like to talk about. The first one's the most important one, which is flow state stabilization. Now what flow state stabilization is basically the camera will absorb a lot of the bumps and runs of this camera as you're moving about. So if you say riding a bicycle down a rocky hill, or even just going for a very fast run, the flow state stabilization inside this camera will absorb it and give you some very smooth looking shots. So you can get some real cool looking shots with this camera, especially when you're moving fast around with it, which as an action camera is what you're going to be doing a lot of. Now the flow state stabilization is automatically applied to the video and photo modes of this camera. In some cases I would have liked to sort of turn it off, but in all honesty, if I'm getting an action camera, why would I want to sort of turn off the flow state stabilization? Now the next sort of stabilization I'd like to talk about is the horizon lock stabilization. Now what this is basically it has sort of a gyro inside the camera that ensures that no matter what angle I'm sort of holding the camera from, it sort of maintains a horizon lock. So it's basically, if I turn the camera upside down, it doesn't turn, well, the whole world upside down. It maintains a lock, which maintains the footage. So it doesn't matter what sort of way I'm moving the camera, it does maintain a balance of the shot. Now the third type of stabilization is the low light stabilization. And basically this is going to be ideal for those darker shots, particularly sort of festivals or clubs or whatever you want to shoot this camera in. you are going to get a bit more shake and blur in those darker environments. And the low light stabilization in this camera does basically remove a little bit of that to give you much better looking shots. Now, I am happy that there are a great deal of settings inside this camera and I don't have to access any sort of weird app to adjust those settings. I just sort of swipe down the screen here and have all the settings I need to access from the camera right here. Now, the settings you do have are fairly sort of straightforward ones. You've got sort of like volume and brightness, and you've got Bluetooth for your headphones and maybe for your phone device as well. But you also have some very cool sort of features that make this camera much more easy to use, especially if you're working alone. For starters, you do have a sort of voice and gesture command options where basically if you sort of make a gesture to the camera, it will start recording. So you don't have to press and then run and hit the spot. You just get the camera set up where you need it, make a gesture, and it'll start recording. And if for whatever reason you can't make a gesture, you do also have voice commands in this camera. So you can turn the voice commands on and you can say start recording and the camera will start recording. It's a great little feature, especially when you're going to be placing this camera in sort of very hard to reach places, or even say you've got on a selfie stick or just sort of far away. I love having those voice commands and gesture control. It does make this camera much easier to use and very convenient. X4 also has an AI assistant, which will identify one clip and then pick the best angles and moments from that clip to give you your own custom-made AI edit. So honestly, that's a bit amazing and a little bit terrifying that this camera can now do my job for me. As you might notice on the camera as well, you do have 3 microphones on the side here, and these microphones ensure that you do sort of get some very sort of clear audio, especially with the noise reduction that is included on this camera. Now you can turn off the noise reduction on this camera if you want sort of more crisper and cleaner audio, but honestly the noise reduction in this camera is very impressive. It cuts it down, makes it clear. Love it. Of course, honestly, I'm not going to be talking with the camera like this, but at a good distance, it does capture enough clear audio. So that's good.
So currently it's pissing down rain. I'm testing out the microphone quality while it's very loud, as well as waterproofing on this camera. And yeah, let's see how it goes. But yep, you can see everything around you. It's great. I can even see Raymond from digiDirect. Hey Raymond.
All right, so right now I'm just walking around this Luna Park exhibition light show. There's a lot of music going on. I'm just currently in the stairway where it's a bit more quiet, showing off the audio. Now I'm going to move down to the music area to really test out this noise reduction, which I've got turned on right now. And we're just going to see how effective it is. I'm not holding the camera a crazy distance away from me, but let's find out. So this is what the music sounds like with me talking. No idea if you can actually hear me, but this is what I sound like right now. So yeah, let me know what you think. I probably can't hear myself, so I don't know why I'm still talking, but yeah.
I'd like to note that if you are sort of intimidated about sort of going for all the settings inside this camera and getting the ideal setting for your shoot, you will be happy to know that on the custom button here, you do have an initial setup for a preset mode. So you press the button here and it'll sort of display you a bunch of preset modes for a particular scenario. So let's say you want to go bicycle riding or swimming or just sports in general. You do have preset modes set in this camera that will set the camera to the ideal functions and settings for that ideal shot. Of course, you also can go into the settings of this camera to access those presets. And if you're not a fan of having those presets on the custom button, you can go into the settings again and change the custom button function. And what you'll be happy to know is this camera right here is actually waterproof straight out of the box. And I mean, even without the lens protective covers, even without the thermal covering, you just have the camera with none of the bits and bobs, it's waterproof. And that's, honestly, it scared me a bit testing it out, but I would find out that basically this camera is, well, 100% waterproof. The one thing I would sort of caution against is you really do want to make sure these little ports here, the battery and the USB-C port, are sealed and shut. As well, if water gets into those, it does break the camera. Haven't broken it yet, so you know, fingers crossed. But it is great to have that waterproof in this camera. 10 meters, that's crazy. You can go up to 50 meters with a sort of special covering on this camera, although I don't have that one here, so I wasn't able to test that out. Although one thing I would caution against is don't have the lens covers on this camera if you're dipping it into water and taking it out again. As what I find is that you do have that radical change in temperature, so these lens covers will basically fog up as soon as you take it out of the water or as soon as you move it from the hot air into the cold water. So keep that in mind, take all the stuff off, shoot it bare, still works great. It's a fantastic camera for waterproof shooting. One thing I would say I don't like about the camera is, again, the lens covers. I'm just not a fan of them. They get dirty easily. I think they're low quality, and I'd definitely be getting the tempered glass lens covers for this camera and throwing out the plastic ones. The battery life is also fairly low if you're someone that likes to sort of travel out to the middle of nowhere or the wilderness. 135 minutes, that's pretty damn cool, but I do recommend purchasing some portable charge batteries or a portable charger to sort of charge this camera in between your shoots. But this is a 360 action camera, and so I do recommend using it for just that. I wouldn't necessarily use this camera as a, well, standard camera, although it does have those sort of options to be a standard camera, which is good and sort of gets me out of a few pinches. But realistically, I am going to be using this camera for its 360 capabilities, and it's basically good for that. But I'm not going to use it for a commercial capacity, and I'm sure as hell not going to be using it for sort of close-ups, as it sort of does begin to distort the subject when it's using such a wide lens. But that wide lens is going to be useful for, well, your wider shots. But that's the Insta360 X4. Let me know what you think of this camera, and if you have any sort of cool ideas of how you would use this camera, please let me know in the comments below.